Today I had the opportunity to go into a meeting on campus at Tennessee Tech. The president of the university is having these meetings with various individuals just to talk about the state of the university and what we think can improve. And one of the things I thought was interesting that came up in the meeting was this word, perception. Perception. What do you do to provide the perception that you want? And that reminded me of something because we were talking about this earlier. Last week I had the opportunity of kind of looking at what was happening at one of the political party conventions. And I happened to just follow a particular speech that was made by a gentleman by the name of Ted Cruz. And initially I was going to turn away from him, but then he started talking. And he said some things that I thought were really interesting. And I thought perception would be that what he was saying was the truth. But the reality of it all is it was so inaccurate. He made a reference to the Republican Party of today being the party of Lincoln. So as a historian, what I wanted to do is share with you some basic information about the original Republican Party and the party today, the original Democratic Party and that party today. And I'll leave it up to you to make the decision later whether really this is the party of Lincoln. I gave you a handout, and forgive me for doing it the way I did, but for some reason I couldn't get to my computer to talk to my printer. So I ended up having to handwrite some things rather than being able to print them out and give them to you. I use 4 words I think that we can look at because if you look at political parties over the last 100 and some years, they're usually 4 areas where they have something to say. Maybe some in addition to that, but it's 4 areas that are constant. Immigration, civil rights, tariff, and internal improvements. In 1854, and I use 1854 for a reason, that's when the Republican Party was formed. A group of individuals in Illinois, they got together around Springfield, and they came up with this political party that they wanted to call the Republican Party. And that original Republican Party, yes, it was anti-immigrant, but not the Spanish-speaking immigrants. Just as another party called the American Party, this Republican Party was really concerned about the influx of people coming in from Ireland. People from Ireland, as a rule of thumb, tend to be Catholic. And it's hard for us to imagine it today, but back in the 1850s, if you were Catholic and you were not in a certain location, then you would be discriminated against tremendously. That's a whole other subject in itself. So certainly that original party was anti-immigrant. That original Republican Party was also pro-civil rights. Pro-civil rights in the sense that the Republican Party was the only party that argued in 1854, let's stop the spread of slavery. They didn't say let's end slavery, but let's stop the spread of slavery. It was the only political party that took that definitive stand. So that's a pro-civil rights stand. They were also very strong pro-tariff. Tariff being a tax on imports. Keep in mind, before 1912, we did not have an income tax. The main source of revenue to run the country came from the tariff. And so they wanted a high one. And then the last thing I wanted to note, that political party in 1854 put a lot of emphasis on what we will call internal improvements. That is, the national government making funds available to make roads passable, to make waterways and seaports usable. And they felt that the national government should have a direct stake in that. The Democratic Party in 1854, now by the way, the Democratic Party was established in 1828, so the true grand old party is not the Republican Party. The true grand old party is the Democratic Party, 1828. Their position was completely different. For example, they tended to be pro-immigration. Why? Because most of the people coming from Ireland joined the Democratic Party. So they wanted those people to come in. They were anti-civil rights. They used the terminology pro-states' rights. Therefore, if you didn't want to allow the protection of certain groups, you didn't have to. They felt that's up to the states to make that decision. That's in 1854. They were against the tariff. They wanted economy and government. The smaller the government they felt, the better. And so we can keep the government small by keeping the tax base very low. We should not be funding schools. We should not be doing a lot of other things. That was the position that they were taking. And then they also said, internal improvements, if the states want to improve their roads, if they want to improve their harbors, let them do it. But the national government should have no say in that. So that's where those two parties stood. in 1854, and the positions were very distinct. I wish we had time to give a whole lecture, bringing it up step by step by step. Let's just move up to 1960. By 1960, you could see the dynamics changing tremendously. And certainly by 1968, the change was even more significant. In fact, what you're going to find is the two parties basically flip-flopping on many issues. For example, just looking at 1960, the year when John Kennedy became the first Catholic, only Catholic, to be elected president of the United States, the Republican Party had a completely different perspective on civil rights. It was indifferent. Do you realize that in 1957, and again in 1960, civil rights acts were passed, but guess what? The Republican Party didn't sponsor it. It was the Democratic Party that sponsored it. The 1964 Civil Rights Act, the 1968 Civil Rights Act, all of those were proposed and promoted by the Democratic Party. The Republican Party was indifferent. Many individuals in the Northeast, they supported civil rights activity, but by then the South had begun to take over the Republican Party, and Southern states began to oppose it. In 1960, the Republican Party was against taxes. They're flip-flop now. We want to keep government small. By 1960, they opposed internal improvement. And one form of internal improvement, I like to list it separately as medical. You know, things like Medicare, for example. Things like TennCare, which would later come out of that, Medicaid. All of those were proposals that were strongly opposed by the Republican Party. Why? It cost money. And the party was promoting being more economical. On the other hand, the Democratic Party flip-flopped too. At the time of the Civil War, it took one position, but certainly by 1960, guess what party was the strongest advocate of civil rights? And even took it further and further and further. The Democratic Party did. The Democratic Party by 1960 was promoting civil rights over the next 20, 30 years, expanding civil rights to affect women, to affect minorities, and so on. The Democratic Party became strongly pro-taxation. Why? Because if you're going to put in effect the internal improvements, and if you're going to put into effect extensive welfare and medical care for a larger part of your population, you need a larger financial base. And so they certainly promoted those as well. So in a few minutes, what we've looked at is where the Republican Party was at the time that it was conceived, what it was like during that period of time, and at the same time what the Democratic Party was like in the 1850s. And we're getting to see where those parties have come to today. The particular point that Cruz made was that my Republican Party is the party of Lincoln. Fellow Toastmasters and guests, what if? What if Abraham Lincoln could rise from the dead today, and he didn't see the name of the political parties, but he only saw the various items that the two parties promoted? Lincoln would probably gravitate towards the party that believed in protecting civil rights, the party that believed in a high tariff, the party that believed in internal improvement, the party that believed that the country should live up to its creed of looking out for the health and betterment of its citizens. So the question I have for you is, really? Is the party of Cruz really the party of Lincoln? And I'll leave that up to you to make that decision, Mr. Toastmaster.
Thank you very much, Toastmaster Kharif.